Good morning, or hello, or good afternoon, indeed. Welcome to another edition of the Statsbomb podcast with me, James York, and
Ted Knutson. We've been deep the irregular podcast, sort of like your grandmother if she hasn't taken their supplements.
We're here today, though, somehow. After an exciting weekend of football, we've got a few topics to hit on. That's pretty much all we've got at the moment, isn't it? Like a kind of casual list of topics. But so much has happened recently, we think we can probably riff on this quite well.
And people keep asking us. So, by asking us, we think that you want us to do it. If you stop asking us, we'll probably stop doing it.
Well, yeah.
There's a Marx Brothers routine where they're talking about, practice and, we don't practice, we don't play. You can't afford it. it's that type of thing. Yeah.
If you stop doing it, I don't think people just want me talking to myself for
an
hour.
No, that's called the video podcast, in fact. You just record yourself on video, and everyone gets very excited, and you get like 200,000 subscribers on YouTube. But we're too old for that.
The James York lectures. That'd be all right. Well, yeah, let's do that. Sorry, I'm retiring. I'm going to do that. Anyway, right, let's get on with this. Right, so first thing, it's not really a statsy analytics thing, but I think after the weekend's cup matches, and even the Liverpool game was a bit weird like that as well, I think there's a little bit of a tale around narrative. Initially, we had the Tottenham game, Tottenham-Chelsea. Tottenham had much the better of most of the game without really kind of getting, cutting through. Well, they scored two very good goals. Obviously, they lost 4-2. Chelsea, I looked at this. I think Chelsea scored 4 from 8, which is, I don't know, 1 in 500 matches as a team do that. It's pretty scarce. It doesn't happen very often. But of course, then we got all the narratives straight off the bat. Oh, Tottenham, the hope that kills them. Oh, they just can't step up in the big games and all this kind of thing.
Oh, the big games. I love the big game narrative. It's my favorite narrative in the entire world.
Well, this is it. I mean, it's let's all just hang it on one game. It just doesn't work. You can't reliably do this. And then Man City did a similar thing against Arsenal, being a bit underwhelming. But again, they're by far the better of the game.
Oh yeah, they dominated the majority of that game. Arsenal came out with a result. It's nice to have that reverse for Arsenal once in a while. On the other hand, they're still in 7th position in the table, and they're still fairly unlikely to make the Champions League. So There you go.
And then Allardyce, the absolute dark artist of this kind of crap, did the same up at Liverpool, didn't he? A handful of shots, set piece, boom, they get the win.
I remember on this very podcast, once again, discussing about how difficult a schedule a relegation straggler had going forward. And then I am also fairly certain we're like, well, yeah, but it's Allardyce.
Yeah.
Obviously, Crystal Palace are currently in 12th, despite that very difficult schedule. They even got a game in hand over a couple of teams around them. Yeah. Hey, he's slightly above the potential future England manager, Eddie Howe. Sam Allardyce, former England manager.
He said it would take until March before his team got their ideas together, brought his ideas together and started grinding out some results. And he was spot on there. He really was. I've got a small
Give him credit.
I've got a small wager on them to finish in the top 10, and it's not looking. It's on. Well, it's not. It might happen.
It is on. They have a game in hand.
They've still got a horrible schedule.
They're 2 points behind Watford with the same number of games. Sorry.
Yeah.
Southampton have like 1 million games in hand. They've only played 31. So.
Big
Sam's good. That's all we can say. But so the weekend was weird. On the flip side, Liverpool have had struggles breaking down bottom half teams all year, and it's because they're playing deep block, and it's a bit because Klopp has had long-term problems with this. Oftentimes what happens with good head coaches, even with good head coaches, is they'll have a style of play that they're great at, and that's either a defensive style or an attacking style. Very rarely does it break so that they can coach both well. And Klopp does like 2/3 of the things that you want really well, right? His defensive style is very plessy-fee. They press really well. He teaches a good zonal press, etc. Then they break, and the counterattacks are really good too. But when you never get a counterattack, and when your press, doesn't have the opportunity to break people down in midfield and get a good run against them, then you have to get into the attacking game. In the United States basketball, you would almost call it the half-court game. And once these teams slow everything down and force Liverpool to play half-court, like, they have a difficult time. I'm sorry, I believe we've slipped into the double pivot podcast. We'll have to go back the other way.
My basketball references are going to be a bit subpar, I'm afraid.
Well, it's playoff time. Come on, James.
Yeah.
We're talking about Russell Westbrook now.
Yeah, he's good, isn't he? I think. That's what I've heard. Well, there are talks about how much of the team he is, I think.
The danger is that James is going to flip this to a cricket podcast, and then I'm dead.
Yeah, no.
IPL time. Here we go.
I'm probably not going to do that. I mean, the point I was trying to make to start with here was basically about the one game narratives are just irritating as hell, because, you know, all three of those games, I think it's easy to say the losing team had the better of the play, and, you know, if they spent the entire season doing that, they'd end up on the right end of things. But, you know, one game. This can happen. Cup games especially.
It's the same thing with one game XG plots, you know? Like, you get an idea, it paints a picture, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's useful or accurate, and yet, you know, the analytics world has gone so far towards this, and we do it somewhat as well, because, like, sometimes it is a fairly clear picture. But, you know, you have to be careful with this type of stuff. Because if you take it into a football club and they're like, well, this is stupid because this is not how anything worked out in this game, like, you're dead. You walk in the door and you're dead from the moment you get there. Yeah. And you know, everyone is fairly bad about this. It's difficult to get away from it, but it is one game, and drawing conclusions about the whole world after one game. Yeah, I mean, the Chelsea fans are out there saying, well, yeah, whatever, Spurs, like, we beat you. Look, if you limit a team to 8 shots, most of those games you're going to do pretty well.
Yeah, exactly. Limit any team to 8 shots. You won't concede, like I say, 4 goals very often at all. You won't see 3 very often. You won't often see 2, really. You know, unless they're incredibly high quality shots. But, you know, just in the aggregate, you can look at it and say, like, that was an unlikely thing to happen. And yeah, it just allows the same old tired narratives to come flying out around the media of like Spurs being chokers, and, I don't know, Liverpool not being able to deal with things, and it's like, well, I don't know, we surely can move beyond that with our analysis. I don't know. Jonathan Yu wrote a thing about the hope dying for Tottenham again. He wrote it on the buzzer kind of thing, so I'll give him a little leeway for actually having to bounce something out kind of straight away.
He's very talented, but yeah, I mean, we all fall into these traps.
And it just frustrates me a little bit. And, you know, we can do better, everyone. We can actually look beyond the simple emotion of things and say, you know, as a Tottenham fan, I was frustrated by the cup defeat, but I wasn't disconsolate, because, you know, we showed up. That's what you can ask for. Did your team show up and do a reasonable job? Yeah, they did. Did they
so
win?
James, here's what's possible that we very rarely admit. Teams can play really well and still lose.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's football. That's how football works. And it's actually part of the joy of it. Like, your team can go into somewhere, and, you know, it's not always a just game. The result is not always just, and it's not always the ref's fault. It's not always the linesman's fault. It's like, teams can play really well and still lose, and we almost never acknowledge that fact. But it happens every single weekend.
Yeah, and football's probably more prone to this than other sports.
It's low scoring,
possibly.
so of course.
The low scoring. You know, you can, like, set up incredibly defensively and pinch a goal, and, you know, and progress or do well on occasion, or even, you know, have entire strategies like that.
We saw PSG a couple of years ago have like 33 shots to 1, and it was like a 1-1 draw or something insane. You're like, well, not our day. And, you know, so many times, you know, you have a great opposing goalkeeper match. Actually, Jack Bonham, full credit to Jack Bonham. I'm going to tell a Brentford story here, but Jack Bonham against Barnsley was out of this world. And in the betting markets, you actually saw that when Bonham's name was announced, like, it took a pretty substantial plunge, because the last time I think that Bonham had started a match might have been Oxford in the Cup. And he had a terrible match, and Brentford had a terrible match. And so, like, nobody knew if Bonham was good. But if that's your prior to judge things, you're like, oh, my God, the difference between him and Daniel Bentley is terrible. And he basically was man of the match that game. Like, there were 24 shots from Barnsley. Mm. I think the XG from both sides was, like, it approached 2.3 or something insane. Yeah. And it finished, like, 1-1. So, and you know, it happens. Sometimes the opposing goalkeeper is out of their mind good, and there you go, right? Like, this is football. It's great in a way, as long as it's not your team on that day.
I know. But just don't get carried away with narratives, everyone. People listening know this. They know all this already. But, you know.
Yes, exactly. We're preaching to the choir. That's what we do up here. This is the Statsbomb sermon. The statistical sermon for the... Yeah, anyway. Another narrative. And this one's fun. So, James, is 36 points enough to save you from relegation this year?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't looked at the... give me a table, quick.
Okay. Swansea have 31 with 34 matches played. Hull have 33, and that's the cusp. Goal differences are minus 29 and minus 31 for Swansea. Now, there's a reason why I'm asking this, but I'm just curious, before I get to that reason, your general opinion. Is 36 enough to stay up?
One win keeps Hull up. You wouldn't think so.
Because there are obviously 4 matches left.
Yeah.
But Swansea are on 31, so they've got to...
They need 2 wins.
They need 2 full wins in order to stay up.
Yeah. It might be, you know. It might be, because... I don't know if Swansea got the win at the weekend, but they have looked pretty shoddy recently. You think they can get 2 wins out of 4? That's quite a big ask.
But Hull fought through a red card, so anything's possible.
Yeah, that was the
an early win too.
Silver's insane record at home continues.
Yeah, Fortress Hull Tiger Stadium or something.
I want to get 37 points on the board if I'm one of those teams. Put it that way.
Okay, fair enough. So the reason why I ask is the team on 36 right now. Do you know who they are?
Yeah, it's our old friends Burnley.
Oh, hey, how about that?
Who've suddenly become slightly pregnable at home, haven't they?
There's no such thing as slightly pregnable, James. It's just like slightly pregnant. You know, you either are or you aren't. It's fully binary.
All right, yeah. Poor choice of language now. I will accept that. So
the reason why I mentioned this is because we were definitely talking about how they were 9th, and James has been banging this drum all year. He's like, their numbers are terrible. This is totally unsustainable.
Yeah.
Finally, we get to game 34, and they're in 16th in the table, and they look mostly safe.
Yeah.
But like the pregnant thing, there's no such thing as mostly safe. You end the season either safe or not. And I think that in these last 4 games, they need at least one more win.
Yeah, that's probably fair enough. They've probably got a fair chance of, I don't know, at Palace, no one wants to go there. At Bournemouth, home to West Ham, home to West Brom, they're all winnable, but you wouldn't fancy them getting anything away from home. And then, of course, Hull Swansea, that's fascinating because they've matched each other, defeat for defeat, win for win the last 3 weeks, and so little has changed. And again, for all these teams at this stage of the season, it is just about getting something to go your way. Like, you know, the whole winning despite having 10 men for most of the game. That's one of those things, isn't it?
That's massive. It's absolutely massive.
As soon as they had a man sent off, you think, well, that's it, they're toast. And they would, if they lost that game, they'd have been a point behind Swansea. Everything is very different. Burnley would suddenly look very safe. They win that game, and you still got those 3 teams looking like they're in the mix.
I heard that some dashingly handsome individual might have written an analysis on Friday about this.
Really? Oh yeah. Well, I've had a little look at Hull and Swansea. Yeah. You took a dig at that. It's on the site if you missed it, anyone. It's all on there. Anything you want to add there, Ted, from that? I did read it, but I don't recall much. You wrote it, so.
I think generally what we see is that both Clement and Marco Silva have probably put themselves, like, if they'd had the full season, they wouldn't really be in much danger. Now, to be fair, like, Swansea have had a fairly weak schedule in front of them for most of the time. But no, they certainly improved on their predecessors, which is, good. That's
good, and also to be expected, really.
Well, and absolutely necessary, right?
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily to be expected. Like, sometimes somebody else comes in and it's a nightmare. But, like, I don't know what happened up in Birmingham, but, they switched out Gary Rowan, who was overperforming a bit.
But it was okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they were in 7th when they swapped him out. But like they were fairly strongly overperforming their metrics, and then they switched him out for Zola, and now you've got Harry Redknapp, tagged in for like the last 3 games of the season to try and save them from relegation because they're right on the cusp. So like it doesn't always work out. Like so on the flip side, like sometimes you get Adkins for Pochettino, and you get an amazing manager hire. So it's
my theory there is that they were so bad it would have been hard for anyone to come in and make them worse. So
yeah,
there was
especially in Hull's case, like
yeah. But it is too close to call. I wouldn't like to be wagering on that. Although, yeah, man in front, Hull are in front, and although their schedule just looks that little bit trickier, that 2 points is going to count for something.
Exactly, and it just really takes one win for them to put a ton of pressure on Swansea. I don't know, it's exciting. Like it's fun to see the bottom of the table, and even the Champions League places are anything but settled at the moment. We know 2 of them, but we don't know the other.
Vicious defeat for Liverpool yesterday, absolutely horrible. Just the worst time to walk into that. It really was. I mean, suddenly, I think they're a coin flip now for top 4. I think so. The models and I didn't look at the betting markets. There were a few models bouncing around the place, and they're a coin flip. City 2 games in hand, 2 points behind them. United 2 games in hand, 3 points behind them, and even Arsenal, who are 9 points but have 3 games in hand. All of them, they're going to have their schedules stacked up. They're going to be playing twice a week coming through, so points on the board is probably a good place for Liverpool right now. But with just 4 games to go, and no longer entirely masters of their own destiny, it would be a bitter shame if they somehow didn't convert and land in the top 4.
Well, it would be the fault of that January-February period with all the games and such, and no squad depth, really.
Absolutely. And
on the flip side, we know that Liverpool have a really relaxed, chilled-out fan base, so I'm sure that, that's not that big a deal.
It's progress.
Like, yeah, we're fine.
If they move from, I can't remember where they finished last season, 8th to 5th or something would be a great achievement. No, it wouldn't. This would be horrible. And they didn't buy in January as well, which was... we banged on about this all the way through, and I mean it wasn't a hard thing to work out. It's like they need some squad depth. They need something to get in there and help them. And the bench they had at the weekend. I mean, we're getting to the stage now where Klopp's always been a bit moody with his subs. Doesn't seem to like making many, but he doesn't want to make subs because he's got kids on the bench and he just doesn't seem to trust them, which. I guess makes some sense, but why have you got kids on the bench, Klopp? Why didn't you buy?
It's the opposite problem of United, especially for the first half of the year. United had so many guys that they had World Cup winners that couldn't get in the matchday squad. That seemed like they're still doing pretty well. Bastian Schweinsteiger's done just fine in Chicago, obviously, substantially easier league, but he's moving well, which we haven't seen much of in Schweinsteiger's recent career. So. United have this interesting thing going on right now where they're what 40% ish, maybe 35 to make the Champions League via the table, to finish top 4, and then they've got the Europa League where they're something like 58% in some of the models. So that's like a pretty interesting. United are better than 70% or so to make a Champions League spot.
Yeah,
however you cut it.
That's crazy to think, actually, isn't it? Whilst still existing outside of, never really being in a Champions League spot. And of course,
they've basically not been top 4 all year. They might have had like a brief time, but they haven't sustained that at all.
And limping along in the, everyone seems to be ready to coronate them in the Europa League, and they limp past Anderlecht. And it again, cup football, small samples. You don't want to be reliably hoping to win a cup if you've got a little bit more of your destiny in your hands in the league. They've lost 3 games all year in the league. That's I bet you can't find. Well, there will be few teams. In fact, there probably isn't a team that's lost 3 games and hasn't finished in the top 2 probably.
That's Mourinho ball right there for you. That is Jose Mourinho's status in football. Like his teams don't lose. They don't often play scintillating football, even with the most expensively assembled squad in history. But not losing and then grinding things out, that's you can survive that way.
There's a bit more going on there, isn't there? This isn't Van Haalball. I think you're taking a bit of a look at this, aren't you? So maybe you'll know.
Something
spoiler
could be out later today, so we're teasing it a little bit here. I'm looking at Mourinho and his impact on United, slightly different than the Duncan Castle stats article, presumably, although I haven't read it. Didn't want to spoil my own perspective on that. But yeah, I think he's had an impact, and they're pretty good right now. The question is, how good are they, and what happens next year? But, it's still, they've got a very strong chance, a better than Liverpool chance, because of the two competitions, of being in the Champions League next year, which is pretty cool.
And goal differences, I was just looking at goal difference here, that's tight as anything. 28 plus 28 Liverpool, plus 28 Man City, plus 26 United, plus 23 Arsenal, plus 20, plus 20, how are Everton there? Anyway, but, there's really wafer-thin kind of margins in this kind of third to sixth battle that's going on, and, really difficult to call. No, again, that Liverpool result yesterday, just horrible result. They were up on 69 points right now. They would be pretty confident. They'd probably be like 70-80% themselves instead of the coin flip. Back to Man United quickly. The poor demise of Zlatan, rest in peace, dear boy, does of course make a fascinating choice for the summer, because it's no longer will they sign him on for another year. I can't believe they would. But they're going to have to go out and buy a top-notch striker, and that's fun in itself, isn't it? Because who could they get? Lots of talk about Griezmann out there. They'd have to pay a pretty penny for him, but they.
Well, he doesn't play center forward either. So maybe they're moving. The opportunity exists to move both Rashford and Martial inside. So I guess as a normal squad planning, that's probably pretty straightforward. So here's a weird thing. I don't mean to. We can come back to this, but in the last 3 weeks of full, or 3 match days of full games, there was 1 draw 3 weeks ago, 1 draw last week, and 2 draws this week. That's really interesting as well, and it's one reason why the table is so volatile and fascinating at the moment. Like, there aren't many draws right now. It's really enjoyable to be a Premier League football fan, like, as it goes into the closed season here.
I didn't look at that, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't usually, and obviously there's a lot of variation, but it's Mourinho's problem is that they have 12 draws this season at Manchester United, which is also a problem that Moyes had the year that he was there. Draws are not good for wanting to make the top of the table, or stay out of the bottom of the table.
Yeah, you made that point about Middlesbrough on the previous.
Yeah, the team with 12 was Middlesbrough,
and look how completely screwed they ended up, down and out. I mean, they're almost very close to being relegated right now, as are Sunderland, but. Yeah, I think they were kind of on the cusp last time we talked about this, and it was like, all them draws. Yeah, it has kind of come home to roost again for both those teams. Made a big impact, and of course Chelsea with 3 draws all year.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously United have been unlucky with the number of draws, though. They've underscored their expected goals by a good bit, and they've dominated a lot of games where they end up with home draws, which actually almost never used to happen at Old Trafford. And Chelsea have the opposite. They have won games that clearly should have been draws, and you can argue that it's their talent, but we see year after year that this kind of thing isn't fully sustainable. Like, if it were just talent, then talent would win out on a regular basis. Then you get into the arguments of, is talent variable, and suddenly we're right back in the mix. But I think Chelsea have not dominated the league as much as the narrative has suggested throughout the course of the year. Like, luckily for them, they are at the top with still a healthy margin for error, and a schedule that's very kind to them. But yeah, so it's really interesting to talk about the narrative and how far ahead Chelsea are, and like all of these narratives throughout the course of the season. If you talk to the stats guy, like, it looks fairly consistent. And like, well, Chelsea aren't as good as their league position says. There you go. Manchester United are better than their league position has said for most of the season. There you go. Arsenal have definitely fallen off substantially. But if they were to string together 3 straight wins, then yes, they could potentially be challenging for they'd be ahead of same points as Liverpool, plus pretty much the same goal difference as well.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an intriguing thing to see the narratives and then listen to our podcast cut through it on a semi or mostly on a monthly basis, and then come back towards the end of the season. You're like, well, it looks like these are the things that happened, and most of the things that we've predicted or at least suggested are in the neighborhood of being correct. And Chelsea have not been as dominant, which is why they're only 4 points ahead at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's this season fascinates me because these top 6 teams have been so generally dominant, and yet
I think you need top 7.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you mean top 7 right now.
I still can't get Everton in there, but anyway, they're all kind of subtly flawed in their own ways, and Chelsea's flaws are kind of masked by their overperformance, a degree of overperformance, and they're all, again, that kind of they're all poised for the summer and remedial work, little bits of work that needs to be done. Like say Diego Costa goes to China in the summer, then what are they going to promote Batshuayi? Are they going to spend a fortune on Lukaku? There'll be just choices to be made there, and they won't. I mean, they won't have that long string of wins probably again next year. That's what's basically taken them.
I think the fascinating what if on the Chelsea side is what if Conte actually had to use his squad this year? How would that have impacted them? Because Chelsea potentially have a very deep internal squad, like guys that they own, kids that are good. They could do all sorts of things with regard to players that they already have, and Conte's never had to touch it. Yeah, next year that changes.
That's true, isn't it? He really hasn't. And I mean, okay, obviously no Europe helps, but yeah, they really haven't had the injuries as well. It's Mourinho's old team plus Kante really that's done it this year. And yeah, obviously Liverpool the same. They're going to have Europe. They don't need to play so many players. Chelsea can survive.
Liverpool, we're looking at like 5 guys, right?
Yeah.
They got to add 5 good guys for the Champions League. Chelsea can just tap into the depth and drag up 2 or 3 guys and make 2 or 3 top signings if they want to. They can also sell off some of their kids that are fantastic. Like I think Tammy Abraham right now is probably a 20 million kid if they wanted to get rid of him, and that's a reason. I think they shouldn't. I think he's actually from the perspective of a development perspective and somebody that's looked a lot at this stuff. Tammy Abraham is the best young England prospect we've had at center forward since probably Harry Kane, and maybe even higher than that. His work physically dominating championship center backs has been outstanding, and he's faster than like a lot of these guys. He can play wide if he needs to. He gives you all sorts of problems. Like I look at him a bit like I looked at Morata when he was at Manchester United, and Abraham's Real Madrid. He's playing on a fairly bad squad, so he's not boosted by the super club. Attention isn't taken away from him. He is the focal point, and he's still crushing it on a regular basis. Morata was lucky enough to fit in with these amazing players and generate awesome numbers. And a similar skill set too. Can dribble, is like 6'3", still really quite fast. A good passer as well. Like the flick goal that he had a couple weeks ago. It's just absurd. How do you even think to do that? And like there's the ball and the ball's in the net.
Yeah.
So like Chelsea have that ability is what I'm trying to say, to just grab up a bunch of talented guys that they already own but have been on loan for years.
You feel like they could do better there as well. I mean, the thing is they have a good squad. They have a good squad of pros out on loan, seasoned pros out on loan, and they have good youngsters as well around the place out on loan here, there, and everywhere. And
do you think they can upgrade Victor Moses?
Do they need to? I don't know. It's hard to say, isn't it? I think Chelsea's general kind of unit. It's hard to really criticise any of them because obviously Moses and Alonso, the two. Well, I suppose they're new guys as well, really, aren't they? On the flanks with that new system, and it's works so well for them. I think
the irony here is also that at one point they until last year they owned Cuadrado, who is one of the better wing backs in the world and would fit just fine in this system, but he ends up for various reasons at being at Juve on a long-term expensive loan or something. I don't know. It's a weird deal.
It is. A 2 or 3 year loan or some weird thing, isn't it? And you got Salah as well, who was been great this season. Have they sold him now? I can't remember if he's still on loan.
Yeah, he's sold.
Yeah.
So Roma and the Reclamation Project officially own him.
So come on, Chelsea. Not that I particularly have a great desire for you to succeed and be brilliant, But yeah, think about your progression. You've done all the hard work for the talented kids. You can bring some through. You can do that.
They have a cool summer coming, and I think they need like a legit fullback. I think this system has actually been forced on Conte to some extent, because I'm not sure that their fullbacks outside of Aspilicueta, who's been a long-term outstanding underrated player, they don't have the other side to match. Ivanovic is now gone. Marcos Alonso is really a center back that happens to do some other things. He's got a different skill set, but he's not the elite fullback. The fullback market is going to be really interesting this year in the Premier League. Like, you've got Chelsea, who need 1, City, who need 2, Liverpool, or 4. Yeah, well, that's a valid point. Liverpool, who need at least 1 and possibly 1.5. Spurs, who need basically 2 halves, depending on. Trippier is not good enough to keep them in that system. That's the big problem. It's not that Trippier is a bad player. It's that Trippier can't play the system. And every time that we see Trippier try to play the system, he struggles.
I don't know. Since they've switched to this 3 at the back thing, he's not bad, because his attacking side, his delivery is pretty decent. He's been okay in this last kind of couple of months.
He has to play 3 at the back. This is what I'm saying. He's not a fullback then. He's a wing back. So he's
been alright in that.
Fullback.
Yeah, I wouldn't be wild about having him in the 4, and similar kind of concerns about Ben Davies on the other side. He's improved. He seems to with a bit of game time, because Rose has been out. He's played a few times and seems to. He'll never be as dashing as Rose, but he's definitely got a bit more of an idea about what's going on up there. But he's a natural defender, so it's not a natural fit. I'm not worried about Spurs' fullbacks, provided they don't sell any of them anyway.
Arsenal have bought Kolasinac, who I think is quite good and gives them a little bit of flex. And but they've the behind Bellerin, actually the right back has been a long-term issue. Bellerin kind of filled that in, but they've owned Jenkinson, who no one has thought has been good enough for ages. Debussy is strangely still in that squad.
Yeah.
Why? Like, did you just really irritate Arsene Wenger to the point that he like says that he's going to sell you every year and then never does? Is that what happened there? I don't understand.
This is where Spurs have evolved. Spurs used to have loads of guys like that just knocking around. And you think, why is he still there? And he hasn't gone out on a loan. He's just there. And that's the one thing that Pochettino's
as to sorted out. Adebayor sitting at home watching Spurs game, tweeting out pictures to their Instagrams.
Yeah. I mean, it just used to be odd, but none of that anymore. A disciplined squad and unit now. Where can we go from here? What else have we got? That's kind of Premiership done. We can talk a little bit about the Champions League. You want to talk about that, Ted? You enjoyed it this year?
Well, I mean, I have enjoyed it. It's been insane. Actually, so I think that City game, the City Monaco tie in total, has to be one of the weirdest outcomes that I can remember seeing, because when we look at Pep's comments, but my comments were before or like around the same time. I hadn't seen them, and then we look at the data. When Manchester City attacked, they demolished Monaco. It's like utterly fascinating. How did this happen so that they attacked so little that they ended up getting knocked out of that tie?
Yeah.
Because and Pep said it too. He's like, I kept encouraging my players to attack, and they wouldn't do it, which is amazing. Like, when has that ever happened?
I don't really want to get into mentality, but if there's a team you do want to talk about mentality with, bloody Man City. It's the same guys that have been frustrating for like 2 or 3 years. Ever since they won the title in 13-14, they've just flattered to deceive. Anyway, that's not what we do. This is a lazy narrative.
Yeah, well, the reason why I mentioned it is because like Monaco probably should have lost that, and for whatever reason they won, and it ended up being one of the best Champions League home and homes that I can remember in recent times. But we keep having them. That's the amazing thing. Like that Real Madrid Bayern Munich game this past weekend was also fantastic, and it was great in the first leg too.
Yeah, absolutely nuts.
And Monaco go through against Dortmund. There's the weirdness of the crazy attack that was a stock prop attack, like absolutely insane. Yeah. Leicester nearly go through against Madrid and possibly deserve to, but obviously they're very, very difficult to play against. And then Barcelona shit the bed twice. And they managed to pull it off against PSG in the most utterly insane fashion. But Juve managed to shut them down.
Just to go back onto that Atletico Leicester game, like, again, the narrative out of that game was, the second leg was, that's Atletico for their buggers to score against. You'll struggle at. Leicester outshot them like 22-5.
Yeah.
And appreciably, Leicester did need to score 3 times. But I don't know if Atletico had just coasted around and limited Leicester to 10 shots. You'd be like, yeah, okay, I'm with that narrative. But 22 shots for 5. I mean, Christ.
Yeah, I suspect Simeone was probably not happy with that. Like the outcome, yes, but the process, and this is kind of the cool thing that we find out from talking to coaches, and these quotes quietly bubble up, but usually they're not very, very direct. If you care about the process as opposed to the outcome, then you care about what's going on behind the scenes. And how do you evaluate process? Well, you could watch the game and say, well, this happened here, this happened here. Stats are really good at evaluating the process for you, at like shaking out some useful information and saying, this is what we see was happening. It gives you another data point, which is quite useful. So like we know for a fact that Pep cares about the process because you can't control the game. You do not get on the pitch. You cannot play it. And, football happens. Like, shit happens. It's what makes football amazing. It's a low-scoring game, and that means that there's variance inside of it. Carlo Ancelotti, the same way. I care about the process, and the process about what's happening in training, and then evaluating that, and what's happening on the pitch. And if our process is improving, then, the results are slightly secondary, at least. The process here, we see that, some of these teams were really challenged. Bayern Munich had, like, a huge lead in the expected goals over Real Madrid until extra time. And like they really put it to them. And I watched that game and I felt like, Madrid were on the ropes. Like this is a boxing match where at any point they could get knocked down. And we've seen Real Madrid be like this a number of times in the Champions League, and it never quite happens. Which part of that is individual brilliance, like, Marcelo or Ronaldo to some extent or whomever takes a game by the scruff of the neck and pulls it out. But part of that is sheer dumb luck as well. Like Bayern easily could have won that match, could have gone through. It could have been Casemiro that got the red as well, and then you feel like Bayern would have put that game away. It's been an amazing Champions League to look at, and to some extent, all of these teams are once again somewhat flawed, except for maybe Juventus. Which means that it creates more interesting matchups, right? People always talk about the super teams, but really, the best matches come from teams that are slightly flawed, that have things that can be exploited, and they keep exploiting each other's weaknesses.
Yeah, I mean, how good was the Clasico last night? I didn't watch it all. I watched the second half or whatever it was, and but that was ridiculous. And part of it, I think Michael Cox tweeted about it. Part of why it was ridiculous because no one was doing smart things at any point.
Yes. That second half was so dumb. Like, how is it that Real Madrid are down a man, like hyper aggressively attacking in the final minutes of the game, and they get beaten on like a 6-on-3 counter or something insane.
Yeah. It felt like that's just I don't know. The Clasico exists outside any kind of external factors. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You got 10 men and it's 30 seconds to go. You still have to attack. That's what you do. Otherwise, you none of us would play it that way, but you have to play.
I'm fairly aggressive in my strategies with teams, and I'm aggressive about all sorts of things. But there's a line. I'm pretty sure that crossed it.
I know. They probably could have got away with just hiding for the last minute. Oh, we just couldn't get our attacks to work. And that would have probably been fine. No, we're just going to bomb forward and then get absolutely shredded. And Messi, the hero, 500 goals for his club. Great stuff. I think the thing with Barcelona is Messi isn't the problem. It really isn't going to be the problem anytime soon. It's everyone behind him in the team, and that's why we're seeing flaws in Barcelona this year. So don't worry about the little Argentinian guy. He's just fine.
Yeah, well, we have to talk a little bit about Barcelona in the same way that we talked about City. You and I and Ben have all over the years talked about how bad Barcelona's recruitment has generally been. And they managed to sign guys that are definitely not worthy of being Barcelona. And it's a bit of a blessing in the same way that Manchester United for years were signing guys that weren't quite good enough. Like if Manchester United if Barcelona were signing like the best right back out there or the best left back or midfielders that made sense for 30 million, they would continue to be quite dominant. Thankfully, they've given everybody else a chance to get involved. Umtiti is a great signing, and actually Umtiti for the last 2 years have been like a real statistical outlier, which doesn't often happen with center backs. But
right.
we looked at him a couple of years ago like, oh my God, he looks amazing. Somebody's going to get a big value deal. But Alex Vidal was underwhelming. Like certainly Digne, they made no sense whatsoever. Andre Gomez, why? Like Alcacer makes sense, right? Because he's done well in the league. He's good enough. He's young. They've added him in. But they've wasted. I mean, if you go back 5 years, they probably wasted 150 million on guys that were pretty clearly not quite good enough.
Yeah.
It makes them once again flawed and fun, and you get games like last night where Messi still does Messi things, and they win in Madrid.
Yeah, and there we go. And that's we do want to be entertained. We want people to do smart things, but also entertainment is on the table here. Just got to find a balance somehow.
Yeah. So one more thing before we get out of here. This week, a very cool announcement was made. Luke Bourne has taken over, I think, VP of strategy at the LA King, or not LA Kings, but Sacramento Kings.
Yeah.
Which is basically like it's a big time role with an NBA team. Now, why are we talking about NBA after I was giving James a hard time earlier? But it's because Luke Bourne actually for the last, I think, 2 years has been the head of analytics at Roma. And you might have heard us, sort of hint to some Champions League clubs or some big clubs doing analytics. Like Roma have been doing that for a while now. Luke is one of the nicest, most wildly talented individuals in any analytics in sports. His groups year after year produce amazing papers for Sloan Analytics Conference, and if you get a chance and you want your brain to be broken, like you should definitely go back and read the stuff that Luke's name is on for like the last 5 years out of Sloan. But I found myself wondering. I was like, oh well, now that this is public information, do you think Geraint Genius thinks that Roma play at the highest level, or the fact that they regularly finish second in Serie A, not quite good enough? Like Barcelona has to do stats in order for them for it to matter to certain people. But Luke is awesome, and Roma have a big set of shoes to fill. And it just goes to show you that there are some really smart clubs out there that are cracking on the stats. And we've talked a bit about Roma's recruitment being quite good in the Reclamation project. There's probably a pretty strong reason for that.
Yeah. That does make sense, and it's interesting actually to have a genuinely talented analytics guy going from football into basketball. That's you might expect the opposite, but that transition is probably quite unusual. But good luck to him.
He likes both sports, and there are a lot of similarities, especially if you're a tracking data person. Like there isn't that much difference between the two in a lot of the applications. Like some of the theory is different, but you can get by. It was interesting at the Sloan conference. They were talking to I think Farhad was there, Billy Bean was there, Maury was there, Sam Hinkie was there, and they were talking a little bit about could you do this in a different sport, and all of them felt mostly that they could, because you're dealing with similar sorts of problems. It's figuring out the theory and the detail and kind of what matters. But like at the end of the day, a lot of the exact same talent evaluation problems, whether it's scouting or database, are similar, and how you analyze the game is similar, and looking for strategic elements that give you a superior strategy also similar. So it's pretty cool, and we wish them the best of luck. Kings are interesting. Let's say interesting. An interesting organization to work for, but Luke is awesome. I'm sure he'll do well.
Cool. Well, there we go. Yes, well, we continue. You got anything else you want to say, Ted?
This is it. This is all I got. Actually, it's not all I got. Later today, there'll be Jose Mourinho and Manchester United manager fingerprints bit. We're going to talk about Louis van Gaal's last season especially, and how Mourinho has changed things and whether or not he's improved them.
I think we know the answer to that, but that should be good, Ted, and we'll look out for it. I think I've got a Tottenham piece on the site somewhere, and you've got your Hull and Swansea thing on there as well. There's always stuff on Statsbomb, people. Go and look at it if you haven't, and we'll be back and do another one of these sometime for the end of the season, I imagine. Okay, thanks, Ted.
Thank you very much, guys. Bye.